open, I think, economic development strategies where we're talking about it. We have a lot of partners involved in this work, 20-plus organizations who are involved, probably 70 or so leaders engaged, working groups that are forming so that we can connect the efforts of all the different organizations in the ecosystem around these strategies. We are not looking to tell folks to do something or not do something as much as creating a longer-term goal and set of objectives where we can leverage the work of all the organizations in the ecosystem. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, James.
So we really appreciate you giving us the opportunity, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and we're happy to answer any questions or clarify anything that you see in the report.
Any questions from the committee? Mr. Swirsky?
Mr. Millar.
Could you speak into your mic, please, Councilor? Thank you.
Mr. Millar, I was pleased to hear you refer to the ecosystem. In fact, I heard it 3 times. Usually we don't always hear that coming from the Chamber of Commerce. Could you explain what you mean when you say that? And why do you say that?
Well, the reason I emphasize it is because as I've come up to speed in the last 6 months or so in the community and talked to folks, a lot of what I've heard is the Chamber has to be a more connected resource to other resources in the community. And so as we did this work and we looked at what other successful communities are doing, it's really when you're leveraging the assets and resources of all the different organizations, government, non-governmental, for-profit, et cetera. Even in this region, we have great regional partners that we haven't taken enough advantage of. People like the Team Neos, the Magnets, the Jumpstarts that are really looking to try to bring resource here to the region. We have to make it easier for them with our own objectives for our own community at the center. So,
okay, I hear what you're saying. Very good, very good.
Any other questions from the committee? Any other questions from other members of council?
I've heard part of this talk before. I guess my real concern is, before people get into trying to discuss the strategies and all of that, we have to do something about those that are delivering the message. And you have to find a way to diversify this group. And we need to diversify it. And as I said at the meeting, the luncheon meeting we had with Mr. Hardy and Mr. Millard, we need some ground level folks to talk about this. Because I think when I heard about how minorities are excluded from opportunities, and I thought that was a pretty strong word. It wasn't just that, and I read the paper like other people did, that talked about something about, Akron is diverse and that we did intentional. Yeah, some of this is intentional, and I think we have to own it in order to make some real changes. And it's not just folks without skills. There are a lot of folks that are skillful in Akron who leave Akron to go to other communities to work because we continue to be excluded from opportunities here. So you've got to do something about the messengers that are trying to get this out, because for those of us of color, I know I can speak for myself and those that I've talked to since this has come out, we just see it as the same old, talking about the problem, and the same people that have been excluding us are telling us what they're going to do to strategize to include us. So you have a real serious challenge, and somehow you're going to find a way to engage folks who know how to engage those individuals in the community to help you figure out how do we really start making some indents into this real problem. And we have to really be very deliberate about separating out this minority piece and put a lot of emphasis on how you plan to address it, what kind of goals and objectives, because I know for a fact those things that are measured and those things are looked at deliberately and paid attention to are the things that get addressed. So we can't gloss over it, and we just can't talk about it as part of this larger problem. It is a serious problem in this community. And I think we know that. All you have to do is drive down Copley Road, and you see all of these young black men, they were boys, but now they're men, who are just not doing anything productive during the day. And we know when they hang around, they're not hanging around for good things. So there are a lot of issues here that we need to pay attention to. We need to find a better way of getting the word out and figure out how we're going to do this as a community. And I'm not saying all of this to point blame, but I think those of us who heard this on paper and somebody finally said it, we knew it all along.
Sure.
So it wasn't news to us. It was just, when will somebody tell the truth about what's going on in this community? And someone said something about skills. No, we're talking about people who are skillful, who have skills and abilities, who leave this city, and you're not tapping into their talents and what they can contribute to this community, because we do not elevate those individuals in positions that help you solve this serious problem that we have. And it's a very serious issue in this community.
So, Councilwoman Hoven, I would say that we wholeheartedly agree. I mean, we were the group that worked to bring it forward, but we are not the group that's going to create the culture change that we subscribe to in the plan. We, as you know, have been working to pull together what we're calling strategy groups for each of the 5 strategies. And you're absolutely right that we felt that not only does inclusion and equity need to be a lens on all that we do as it relates to economic development, but it is, our situation is so pronounced, it required us to have a separate strategy. So, for example, one of the things that this city council will see when we bring the operating budget next year is that Steve and myself have revamped, as a part of this process, the contract between the city and the chamber to fund an executive level position at the chamber to focus solely on how we get at economic exclusion and start to turn the tide on that. So I think that, you know, as I said at the roundtable, like, I am not the right person to carry this all the way home. We've started it. It's a culture change. It's going to take a long time. It took us a long time to get here. It's going to take us a little bit to get out. But the first thing we're going to do, as it says in that strategy, is really come together and employ as many people as possible, traditional and non-traditional, to develop that shared narrative and those shared metrics, so all of us are holding each other accountable for moving this issue forward in a positive way. And I know Councilwoman Sims was at one of the first sort of iterative meetings. We are proactively reaching out to some of those very folks that are in the community, organizing to get them involved. They, unfortunately, not all could make that initial meeting, but they're engaged. We're going to keep working to get them more engaged. And without question, those of us that work in the economic development space are going to need to get out of our comfort zone if this is going to move. And I think all of us, at least the 4 of us, are more than willing to put ourselves out there that we, you're right, are not the key messengers for every community, but we are more than willing to recruit and empower those that are to take it on and work with us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to say thank you to the members of the chamber that came through for just being transparent, sharing that information. But this is more so to the members on council. This isn't anything new to us. We have people come down and they speak across the podium at least a couple times a month about not having the opportunity to participate in what this city has going on. We've passed at least twice a resolution acknowledging the nation's first National Day of Racial Healing. It targets folk legislators trying to educate us on how to make sure that when we pass policy, that it doesn't unintentionally discriminate against segments of the community. And what I want to share with members of council is, you know, when we say these things, and they've been said across the horseshoe, there's a reason why we say them. And that we have to make sure that our policy reflects you know, what we're trying to achieve. So like when we give a company TIFs, or when we give them certain incentives to come here, we have to have some requirements that they're going to help us meet those goals and objectives. So I appreciate this. Mr. Hardy and I have spoken about this. We need to go through some more training to make sure that as we pass legislation and pass things, that we are more sensitive to the goal that we're trying to achieve. I think in the past it has come off as, just hasn't been well received among some of the members of the Horseshoe. I know we've talked about some folks that can help us do that. If you have examples of others, I mean, some of us have been exposed to that, but for us, just to be totally honest, for some of our colleagues, it's not well received by them. Matter of fact, we had one meeting where some felt that there wasn't even that type of discrimination or bias that's taking place. And I thank them for being honest about that. You know, but the reality is that now you've come out and said this, an independent third party has come out and said this. So now, as a legislative body and as an administrative body, we need to be there's a word I'm looking for, but
Intentional.
thank you very much. Intentional about achieving this goal, and it's something that every week we pass legislation for millions of dollars. So we need to start where we are right now, and measuring and seeing how that's taking place. So thank you.
You're very welcome. So one of the things we talked about at the first meeting of Opportunity Akron was to get at the definition that we all talk about, equity and inclusion, and to do that not as a closed group, but to open that up so everybody have a shared understanding of what that means. It's not just our ideas. You know, it's sad, there was a very good, I think, first meeting. We talked a little bit about the moral imperative, and some, you know, it's kind of heartbreaking that we can't sell that just based on the data, that this is a moral imperative, that we have intentionally, not we, so, and I mean that very generically, have excluded a certain population of our community that represents a third of the Akron community. But I think what we got from the initial meeting, and I think we're still looking for other folks to join that meeting, that group, and even any of the other remaining 4 strategy groups, is a real clarity, is that we're not waiting, we don't want to wait what's going to happen 20 years down the road. We want some low-hanging fruit that we can get at and say, yeah, this is where we've made some inroads, or here's where we're being intentional across all 5 strategies, not just this one where black folks are really suffering economically, but how are we doing this other stuff? How are we identifying these small cap businesses that potentially are African-American run businesses, and how do we include those? So I think, again, I, like already has been said here, am very appreciative of the acknowledgement, but also hear my colleague loud and clear about who the messengers are. Even as we look at some of the opportunity zones, because of the way the census tracts are kind of set up, some of the places that I think need some money or need some resources are not kind of represented. Even when we look at the opportunity zones. So how do we really get at that piece to say, we do really see you, and we know where you're at, and here's what we're doing. And I think part of that is, again, saying we're not going to send ourselves out here with this is what we're going to do by 2035, but here's what we're doing in the next 6 months, 6 years, next 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, and not way down the road, because it does sound, again, like we're going to leave this for somebody else to handle. And I didn't get the sense that that's really where we're at. So I'm appreciative as well. Mr. Fusco?
Thanks. This is, excuse me, obviously the downtown Akron is downtown Akron is downtown Akron. However, though, I see some areas in here where it says more of a regional approach, which I don't think any of us here are necessarily adverse to, but just kind of clarify some of that in terms of the regional approach type things. And we have, I think we've, over the years, the city has worked well with others in terms of regionally with water and utilities and so on and so forth. You can just expound a little bit on that.
And one of the things that we looked at the beginning of this work was, you know, you've got 3 different entities with the city, you've got the county, and you've got the chamber, and each of us have progressively larger geography. I think the thought was that we want to begin with some very specific strategies, and if you think about it as sort of a target, you know, the city is a core target. If the city is successful, we will see increases in the economy around the region. But there's also points for Summit County successes, and there are points for regional successes as well. They build on each other. But our core focus here really is we started with the MSA of Akron, which is Summit and Portage counties. But a lot of these strategies are going to specifically start here in the city and work their way outward.
Yeah, I don't believe that when the term regional is used in the study or any of the findings or anything like that, or any of the strategies, that it implies that Akron has not been a regional partner. I don't think
Oh,
that's
no, I
what-
wasn't
yeah.
even insinuating that, yeah.
But when we talk about like a business visitation strategy, there are certain things that we can collectively do that are just good practices that we should use, whether we're in Akron, whether we're in Talmadge, whether we're in Richfield, or for the Chamber's perspective in Portage County. When we talk about the job hub strategy, identifying that we need to get transportation to our job hubs so that people who don't live near those job hubs can still work there, and it doesn't take them 2 hours to get there in order to work. Those are strategies that are regional approaches that apply as much as they do in Richfield and Stowe, if not maybe more so, where the new buildings are going up and people need to be able to get to work, as they do within the city of Akron. So I think it's more of as we work on those specific tactics within those strategies, there are certainly regional tactics that we can employ across all of our 3 varying footprints.
And you?
Thank you. Go ahead.
I would only add that the other aspect of regionalism that I think is clear, or just want to clarify in there, is that, you know, one of the things just from a city administration, but I also think city council, it's good to note this, is, you know, the amount of resources we used to have to devote to economic development from a staffing perspective are never coming back. So how do we increase our output with less on the input side? And so one of the things that's really exciting to me, but it's definitely a culture change, is how do I lean on Jason and his team? How do I lean better on, or we lean better on Steve and his team around just from how do you get at all this? And so from a regional perspective, and Steve touched on this, how do we better leverage Team Neo? How do we better leverage the magnets and the jump starts and the resources, both monetary and otherwise, to fill the gaps in where we once had 18 employees, we now have 4. So I mean, how do we increase our outputs by taking a more regional approach? We're still going to be focused on Akron. That's what we get paid to do.
No,
but how do we leverage what is out there to bring to bear for Akron?
And I get it that sometimes just Akron just isn't a good fit. Obviously, we understand that, I think, you know, but the thing of it is like I said, I have a bunch of other questions, but I'm not going to take up any more time. I'll just ask James afterwards.
I mean, I think your questions, Ms. Councilman, are good questions for all of us to hear, and we probably are kind of mulling over some of it too.
Yeah, no, well, I'm happy to meet afterwards, maybe if you have time, you know. Like I said, I have a couple more questions.
So just one of the other things before we go, I just wanted to touch, you know, to make sure we understand that some of these things, practices or strategies we're talking about are very realistic. We do have small or medium-sized cap organizations that we're just missing because we haven't done that kind of outreach. I just wanted us to talk about the med thing in the garage with the dad and the chicken wire thing.
Fused chicken?
Fused chicken.
Fused chicken thing that we could have, you know, could have been a big deal for us.
So Madam Chair, if you look, and we probably learned today we need to number the pages here, but if you look at the BRE strategy, you'll see we identify 120 small and middle market companies that are going to be those key companies that we're going to focus on. And then you see the point underneath it where it says high potential polymer foreign owners and scale up. So as we've already begun working with our teams, we've essentially segmented that 120 out and said, okay, let's find the 25 scale-up companies, which are those small companies that are beyond startup stage, that are going to be the ones that are going to grow, become mature firms, and that we want to keep here. If you go onto the Spark page, I don't know that it's as specific there. Yeah, it's not as specific as what's written here. But we're also going to identify those top 25 startup companies that we need to help grow to become scale-up companies, and then grow them from scale-up to mature firms. And obviously, when you're talking about moving from startup to scale-up to mature firms, some companies are going to succeed, some companies are not. Some companies, and so they're going to kind of go in and out of those buckets based on what happens with the company. So we have a process that we've developed and our people are working through right now to identify who those key businesses are. And to some of what we talked about earlier, the reality is the business owners of those businesses can't look like the four of us. That there needs to be intentionality with our opportunity approach on how we put together each one of the segments that make up that 120, which is actually more like 150 by the time we get everything put together.
Could I add one point to that question, Councilwoman Sims? So I was at the meeting of the Spark Akron group, which is the one working on startups, and there was a long discussion about a lot of startup places like Bounce focus so much on tech firms that you just sort of design out by that being your focus. You're not looking at a lot of minority-owned firms. You're not looking at a lot of women-owned firms. So that group had a very good discussion about how is this approach going to make sure that we are inclusive. Like all these lists of companies, we had a representative from the Urban League there who was contributing all the ideas to the list of companies from companies that she has worked with, many of which are probably more grassroots, but just making sure from the start that the lens is looking not just in the usual places, to make sure we have a robust cohort.
Very good. Councilman Neal.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to ask, to Councilman Fusco's point, there are a lot of questions we're not going to be able to answer today, but I would like for us to be intentional about measuring our progress as council in partnership with the administration, in partnership with the chamber. So I just ask that sometime, we've got about a month, and I think everybody's just holding on, waiting for the holiday, really trying to cruise through. So really, when we come back at the first of the year, if we can have some set times where okay, we know this quarter, we're going to come back together. We can have some training in place for us. We can find out what else we need to do so that we can measure, so that we know that we're going to be moving the ball forward.
Yeah, so I think that's what part of the groups are doing too, and I don't know when they're meeting, but maybe there's some opportunity.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm talking about us.
Oh, us as a council.
There's a role that we play that we have to understand, how to be better legislators. There's some things you can't do now, but there's other things that we can do when we write legislation that would incentivize companies to meet our goals and objectives to be more inclusive.
And so, thank you, Councilman. I think that to your point, and that was why it was so important for us to have you all come today to turn on that lens that may be off, so that we are a little more hypersensitive, if you will, as we look at legislation that comes around this horseshoe. So, are there any other questions? Councilman Swirsky.
I was encouraged by the concrete focus on transportation, because I do see that both as an instructor of GED classes and also as ward councilman, that is a barrier to people accessing employment. So have you done some initial thinking about what kinds of things in transportation? Not that you'd have to tell us every single thing, but what do you mean when you say that? What are some possibilities in that area that we need to explore?
Yeah, so this isn't going to come as a surprise. I think a key player in that is going to be Metro, and working with Metro in order to target their route planning towards where the jobs are and where people live, and to make sure that we make the connections to get people, like I said earlier, quickly from where they live over to those job hubs. Several years ago, Tim Crawford, who's was one of the county council members, kind of went through the process to determine if you lived in Barberton in his district and you wanted to go to the job center to find out, to go through the process to find employment, that it was either an hour and a half or an hour and 45-minute trip with a transfer over at the transfer station to get from Barberton to the job center. And layer in having children on top of that, other things that people face in their life. And it quite frankly disincentivizes people to look for employment and to have employment and keep employment. And so we need to identify ways that we can eliminate and reduce those barriers, the timing that it takes to get to and from. I have some specific ideas I don't want to throw out on the record, but, as we talk about, potentially some of these larger employers that may come in town, we need to figure out a way that those jobs aren't going to people who have cars in Doylestown and Massillon and are able to get on a bus and go from, from the county's perspective, Barberton or Springfield and to join people that are in the Bookville cluster in East Akron and be able to go get those new economic opportunities we have. Because if we don't make it feasible for people to do that, those jobs will go to people that don't live in the city and don't live in the county. And so there's a number of ways we can get there. We could probably talk about that for 3 hours, but I think engaging Metro in that process is critical.
Yeah, I mean, my GD classes are held at the job center, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So some of the other discussion we had too was how do we begin to really exploit the usages of our community learning centers, particularly preparing people for the skills. We have Stark State, we have real opportunity here to begin doing that where, walking from, say, a Bookville CLC or ECLC from the neighborhood is not a really out of the way question, but really it's realistic and we can get the skills to the folks who need them. So.
Yeah, I think one thing that, just real quick, to Councilman Neal's point, if there's one thing that sticks in our heads as we think about policymaking, it's the place really matters. Yeah. Pretty much economic development for the last 25 years has been agnostic to place, outside of we want it for our city, which we all do, right? But where you place it, what support systems like transportation you have in place matters. You can't be place agnostic and just put jobs wherever you can find them. You really have to think and be intentional about where they're geographically located and how easy it is or not for people to access those opportunities.
Again, I know we can go on forever. This is an excellent topic. I thank you guys for the intentional work and all that's becoming of the work that you've all started. If there's any other questions, nothing else to come before the committee, Economic Development Committee is now adjourned. Thank you.
We have one more committee, it's budget. And let me see who's chaired budget. Freeman's not here, right? Okay.
maybe I won't. I'd like to call the Budget Committee to order. Do I have approval on the minutes from our past meeting? So moved. I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, our minutes pass. We have nothing on our old agenda. Well, we do have something on our new. And on our new agenda, under Budget and Finance, I would also like to note that Councilman Freeman is absent today from the
I
committee.
have it, thank you.
We have two items on Budget and Finance. The first one is an ordinance providing for the temporary appropriation for the current expenses, other expenditures, and the capital outlays of the City of Akron for the period of January the 1st, 2019 through March the 31st, 2019, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Fricker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the temporary appropriation ordinance for 2019. This is part of our annual budget process that we do. So typically we pass a temporary ordinance in the preceding year that covers basically, and what you see before you basically covers about 1/4 of the expenditures for a year. So what we did is we looked at the expenditures for the first 3 months of 2018, and those are largely the figures you see before you. So this budget will ultimately be replaced by the final appropriation ordinance that we pass sometime in the first quarter of 2019.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fricker. Are there any questions from the committee? Any questions from other members of council? Seeing and hearing none, what is your pleasure?
Consent agenda, please.
May I have a motion for the consent agenda? I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for the consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, this item will be placed on the consent agenda. Our second item to come before Budget and Finance is an ordinance approving and authorizing the expenditure of $10,000 previously designated for My Neighborhood or Akron for the purchase of one-year subscriptions of the Balancing Act Pro, taxpayer receipt, and meeting mode software as approved in ordinance number 100-218 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Fricker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll defer to Councilman Neal.
Councilman Neal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brought this back in basically after hearing the concerns from some members of council. Put this in perspective, this has been a piece that's really been before us for the past 2 years. Back in the spring, we passed legislation to acquire the software, which comes with a 30-day free trial. At one time, the first time, I believe Mr. Fricker and them had a 15-minute meeting that went to about an hour. Saw the benefit of the program, but at that time, we didn't have it in the budget. Came into the new year, went to put it in the budget, but at that time, the finance department didn't feel it was a tool that they could use. So we've brought it in as a tool, even though initially it was brought in for the finance department. Mainly this is for us on council so that we can understand, communicate on how to use, best utilize the resources in the city. The challenge was, after we had passed the legislation, was how were we going to fund it? Identified the funding source being the leftover funds from the My Neighborhood or Akron grant. There were some concerns about possibly those funds being able to be used for some wards that had exhausted their use of those funds. Going through our notes, when we cut the My Neighborhood or Akron dollars from $100,000 to $40,000, there was some discussion because when that was cut, we took some money and we used it for the summer slide program. During that discussion, Councilman Fusco mentioned that, you know, if we needed more funds, we can find more funds. He'd be willing to find some more funds. I don't think that's going to be needed because taking $10,000 out, based on my last conversation with Ms. Karen Haig, it would still leave somewhere in the neighborhood of about $14,000 left. Because since we've talked, thankfully, there's been some more grant requests come in. So I think we've moved from about 10,000 to where now we might be around 14, 15,000 in grant requests, which leaves about $25,000 left over. If we take $10,000 to fund this program, if after using the 30-day trial, as council, we agreed to utilize it, it would still leave $15,000 left over potentially if there's some last-minute requests to come in. So wanted to bring that back in because the concern was, that was one concern about the funds, but the other concern was who was going to install the program. And shared with the council at that time that the company had offered, and I sent this out to everyone in an email, 10 hours of support time. I called them, I believe my colleague, Ms. Amobian, called them, and they have confirmed that. But also, I let council know that I would be willing to head up the installation of the program so that there's not a concern. I believe during a meeting with the finance department, especially since we're using Open Checkbook, that information could be imported. It depends on how detailed we want to get. It could be imported in a few hours. But, you know, I went back and actually, Councilman Fusco attended this meeting that we had back in April, the one at Simon Perkins Middle School that dealt with the 50 years, Poor People's Campaign. At that meeting, we had a sign-in sheet, and I forgot about this, of folks who wanted to participate on the online budget information. At that meeting alone, and there's others, there were like 25 people who signed up, wanted to participate and assist in the city's online budget. And these weren't all people from Ward 4, because this was open to the community. Just looking at some of the addresses, and it's here for anyone that wants to see it. Right off the top, there's Ward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8. I think there's a 7 on here, a 9. Citizens' participation, if you use the two sheets that are here, we have what amounts to about 50 folks that are, if you want to see these, that are interested in participating in city government. And if I can put this in a bigger scope, and I think this is something that I think we as council need to take some time to talk about. This online budget process is just one tool of, we've talked about smart cities. This is one tool that is a piece of an overall smart city plan that just as we map out how we're going to put roads and infrastructure in a new development, as a city, we need to look at how are we utilizing technology so that it's not fragmented. I mean, now our folks can drive down the street and read meters without even getting out of the car. That's using technology. As a smart city, that should feed right into our system and load right up to where the water department, it goes right into the billing. And from a budget standpoint, you would be able to go online and see exactly what the billings are for that year. Myself and Councilwoman Amobian were in LA, and I jokingly said we stepped upon Wakanda, because there was a city that was just like that. When they utilized the service, citizens could go online and see their budget online and actually see real-time deduction from their city's budget. It was also connected with their app to when they sent in a service request, everything was online. So this is a tool, one, to help us understand the budget. But as we look out on how we're doing business as a city, moving towards this smart city model, and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. This is the way all cities are going, using technology to engage citizens and to provide better service. So, wanted to bring this back, one, so that we can have an opportunity to really use the 30-day trial. This may work, it may not work. but we won't know until we try it. So that's why I'm bringing it back, because after hearing all the requests, as the last time it came, I wanted to make sure I understood what the concerns were of colleagues on council. And the only concern I heard was who was going to install the software. There are 50 names right there of citizens who participated in the Poor People's Campaign that want to be engaged in open government. 25 of those specifically dealing with online budget. So there is a team of folks that are willing to take leadership in installing the software. And then hopefully we can have an opportunity to have further discussion, because one of those who were interested in open discussion was a member of the school board, Ms. Carla Sibley. This is a way for us not just to engage our citizens, but they're citizens too, but our students as well in the process of understanding government. And I think with the mayor's leadership team, with the United Ways neighborhood engagement program, there are a lot of people that are now have been exposed that are looking for ways to be engaged into working with the city, and this is just a great opportunity. So,
Thank you, Councilman Neal. Is there anyone from the committee that would like to make a comment? Councilman Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions thinking about this. Talking about the funds and where they're coming from and everything, should we wait for finalization of the program that's for My Neighborhood, Our Akron, and awards and everything before we start appropriating the funds from that? I don't know. I would imagine that would have to be finalized and closed before we could go in and start appropriating funding from there.
Well, Mr. Hope, the actual grant program closed October 31st. It's still open for, Ms. Haig knows that there are some other grants that are coming in, but on our application it closed out, it stated closed October 31st. Now, we always have carryover, because I have one that's going to take place on the weekend of December 7th that I've informed Ms. Haig about. But again, this is to identify funds for, so that we could generate the purchase order, so that we could use a 30-day trial. If something happened by some miraculous way that we exhausted all of the My Neighborhood or Akron funds because we had a slew of last-minute requests, we probably won't get the 30-day trial up at the earliest, the end of January. We would be going into the new budget cycle where we could then, if we find this tool one that we feel we want to utilize, we could just put it in a new budget cycle. Or I also mentioned there were some other funds that we can look at. We rarely exhaust all of our travel budget. So I mentioned the My Neighborhood or Akron funds because we have those dollars available. But to your point, if something happened where they weren't there, we could always come back in and reappropriate some other funds, or just write it into the budget, because we're not going to be able to even utilize the trial until January at the earliest.
Okay. What is the actual cost of this program? Because I've heard different amounts.
The actual cost, if we utilize all three parts, is $8,500. And to your question, that was a good one last time we spoke about this. There is a renewal fee every year, but let's say we don't want to, let's say we only want to use the tool to where council would use it so that we can look at the budget, see what changes we could make, and citizens could go in and look. That part of the budget would cost us about $4,500 a year. Because there's Balancing Act Pro, which is the budget online. There's a citizens engagement component. Then there's the tax receipt, which allows citizens to see what their actual tax dollars fund. And you can buy those a la carte. The main cog is the Balancing Act Pro, and that's about, that's less than $3,000 a year.
Okay. How many cities are using this?
I've sent out emails that show those that are using it. There are multiple cities that are using it. And then again, that are using Balancing Act Pro. When you talk about using online budgeting, this is what progressive cities are doing, because we talk about engaging our citizens. This is the way to do it. Open data platforms that engage citizens, also known as the smart city model, is a way that every city is moving towards.
I know you said multiple cities. I mean, that could be 2. I mean, how many are
No,
actually?
sir.
How many
Again,
are
I don't
using
have the, I can pull the email. I'll have the email back by this evening. I've sent out emails with that information. There's some of them that I can recall are Austin, San Francisco. The closest one to us was Hudson. They tried it. But I'll pull that list. I'll pull up the email again for you so that you can have those cities.
Okay. Have you acquired permission to program this into the city's finance or, IT system? I mean,
Again, sir, this is a cloud-based system separate from, we don't get into the city's hardware or any, matter of fact, hardware where people are keeping information online is an expensive way of doing business now. Most cities are moving to cloud-based systems. This right here is cloud-based. It's totally separate from utilizing the city's software. There's probably more danger with someone sending an email to your cell phone that's tied into the city's infrastructure than going online and using this cloud-based, which is totally separate.
well, then this has nothing to do with the city and its system, or its?
It doesn't use the city's hardware. It doesn't tie into our actual system. The information is loaded into a cloud-based system where their software is, and then our information is able to be utilized.
I already don't trust it. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't. I don't know. You named off a lot of wards that you said were possibly represented in these sheets. I mean, I only see maybe. I mean, there's sheets that are there, but there's also people that have signed on, over and over again. There's only about maybe 25 or 30 people there out of a 200,000 person city, and I've never had a question. I've never had a call. I've never had anybody ask about this that's heard about it or wanted to go in this direction. I just don't. We already have an open checkbook. We already have everything on our city site that you can go on and look at and see this. I don't see the need for it.
I do have to correct you there. We do not have anything like this. This is not open checkbook. This is, our state legislators did budget presentations for their constituents, but that was a PowerPoint. This isn't even a PowerPoint. This is actually being able to go on and use our numbers. National League of Cities endorsed this program, and they ran a class. I know I participated in it. I don't know if Ms. Amobian did, but to show how you engage your citizens and empower them to help the city make some of the tough budget decisions. Again, I'm not asking us to purchase it. I'm asking us to try it.
Well, you're asking for $10,000.
No, I'm asking us if we approve it. That's only if we approve it. For us to do the 30-day trial, we need to show that we have a way to fund this. Now, I have had some of your constituents who are interested in being part of the leadership team with this. So again, you know, I think we know that the way we do business here on council, trying to understand close to $1 billion budget using spreadsheets and turning to pages, and then when we have questions, we send them through on an email. There's not even a thread that you could go in and follow. You gotta hope you saw the email, and then that's how we manage the city's resources. We should, as council, we should be projecting a 5-year budget on how we're going to grow the city's reserves. We don't do that.
That's not our responsibility.
Mr. Hope, that is,
No, the
Mr. Hope, that is our
responsibility
responsibility.
is in the administration, and through the mayor and his administration. And I think with trying to do something like this and trying to tell them how to figure out the budgeting and everything is overstepping our boundaries.
No, Mr. Hope, this isn't trying to, we're supposed to work in conjunction with the administration. We have to have an understanding. Council's responsibility is overseeing the city's assets and resources. That's why the administration comes to us to approve the budget. We have to understand. We have to be able to, we're supposed to be able to provide the checks and balances to help grow the city's reserves and make sure that when we make certain decisions that the city's going to be in the position to grow. We need a tool to do that. So again, I understand you may feel that we don't need this. All I'm asking us to do is try it. After we try it, if it doesn't meet its need, don't utilize it. But for us to say that we feel we have an understanding on, and that we are doing our best job utilizing the methods and processes that we're using right now, I know we're fooling ourselves. I mean, I don't know how many colleagues have taken advantage of the training that is provided to us. I've sent out a government best practice budgeting book. Sent it out at least 3 times. I can send it out again. This tool is the way that cities are doing business.
But I don't know which ones, and you don't know how many.
I said I was going to get you that email. I don't want to just make something up. But I sent the email out 3 or 4 times.
Okay. Is there any other comments?
The only,
Councilwoman Amovian?
the only comment I'd like to make is that as I talked with other council members from across the country, when we talk about budget, it's very clear that the budget is open. Everything that's in the budget is public information, and it's not a matter of people, doing anything to damage the budget. I mean, any and everything about the budget can be requested, and people can see it, and it shouldn't be something that we have difficulty doing. The other thing is, I attended a session on open data. This is the way of the future. And honest to goodness, with all these tools available to us to understand and to learn, when Mr. Neal talked about the city, there was a city there that had their city on screen. They could manage their city from LA, and they are way across the country in Maryland. And they could see everything that was going on including accidents and everything. And people could go online and get police reports. I mean, there's just so many tools out there to help us do our work and to make it easier. But not only that, these tools can actually be used for the positive, for people to see just how difficult it is to balance a budget, just how difficult it is to do the things that are necessary to run a city well without the necessary resources. I mean, there are so many positives that can help us that they far outweigh the negatives. So I have no issue with this at all.
Any other members of the committee? Councilman Fusco?
Yes, thank you. We have, I don't know what the sponsor wishes are, but we have a number of members who are not going to be here this evening. And something like this we've talked about before, and I'd like to make sure that they have an opportunity to weigh in and so on and so forth. So I would respectfully request the committee to take time on this.
Thank you. I would like to make a comment. Mr. Fricker, we have open checkbook, correct?
That is correct.
Was that not recommended by the state of Ohio that we use that?
The state treasurer's office kind of campaigned across the state to get cities to participate. And Akron was, we were not the first, but we were, certainly in the first half of cities that participated. I think we started at the beginning of 2016 and have put everything out there ever since.
I recall the workshop we kind of had on it, introducing it to us. Now, do you find it transparent?
Yes, I mean, it basically shows every check that the city cuts to a vendor, so it represents 100% of our expenditures.
So,
Now, keep in mind, it does not show the expenditures in the same way that the budget does. It just by the nature, for instance, our payroll, you don't see individual paychecks by each department. What you see is, every week we cut a check to our direct deposit account where all of the employees have their checks deposited. So that's one check per week. So you don't see the labor all broken down by department on the checkbook.
okay, so that's just payroll.
Correct.
We're talking about,
Yeah.
so that you-
Every other vendor
making a
check, that's
distinction
really the
there.
exception to that. So every other vendor check, shows up as a payment to a vendor.
And prior to that, were we using anything online or whatever that was accessible to?
Well, we've had the open books online in place for a number of years, so we always publish our annual operating budget as a PDF out on the city's website, our CAFR, I believe our quarterly financial report. So there's a number of financial reports that we do put out on the website.
Okay, and that's been going on for a number of
For
years?
several years, yes.
Okay, but the open checkbook came in about
2016 is when we started that. Yeah.
Okay, I had a motion for time. Do I have a second? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we will give this time. Thank you.
All right, that's it. Dilly dilly.